we need more creative solutions to our problems because it's just not working. The traditional means are not working. Joe Manchin's not listening to us. Elon Musk's not listening to us. So what is it going to take? What is it going to actually take to transform circumstances rapidly so that working people, indigenous people, immigrants right now, so the entire country is sustained, so the next generation and this generation can survive? Well, our next guest, Michael Albert, is the author of No Bosses, A New Economy for a Better World. Quite brilliant. Michael, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. So I love the idea of first off, the book cover is beautiful too. Published by Zero Books, a friend of the show. Your preface is Noam Chomsky and Yanni Varoufakis. Happy birthday, Noam Chomsky, yesterday, by the way. Quite a preface. Also friends of the show. So, is this going to be? Are we going to be like having marches for no bosses? How do we do this?
Well, there's two different questions. How do we get there, and where are we going? The book is about a place to go. In other words, the book is about a vision for a future situation. It's only to a very small extent about issues associated with how to get there. So I'm happy to talk about either one, but if we're talking about the book, it would be, the vision, the new economy. And the new economy, we call it participatory economics. Some people call it participatory socialism. It's not a blueprint where, everything is laid out and then sort of like a blueprint for a building, and you build it and you stick to the guidelines.
Right.
It's nothing like that. It's literally 5 key features, each of which we think is essential if a new economy is going to be consistent with our values: self-management, solidarity, diversity, sustainability, and equity. And so we make a case for each of these 5 features. And then as far as a new economy, the process of winning it, the process of developing, will add many details that we learn through experience.
So just 30,000 foot analysis. If we're to look at, say, a union and how a union organizes, I'm not saying how they, because obviously the unions don't run businesses, they're part of businesses, they're the labor, but how they organize. I mean, there is, let's pick the most militant unions, the trade unions that we've seen in American history. Even then, there's still leadership and there's still a union president. How are you able to, especially, at a job, how are you able to ensure that everybody is acting out of solidarity, everybody is, doing their part and is, I mean, especially if there's a workforce that's not experienced, younger workforce that may not necessarily know the path, like the way to conduct yourself. I mean, when you first join the workforce, there's a lot of things you learn. So how do you ensure that?
These are all the kinds of questions that I and Robin Hennell, when we were thinking about this initially a long time ago, asked ourselves. They're exactly the right kinds of questions to ask. If you're going to say that you can't have private ownership, you can't have Bezos owning Amazon and so on and so forth, you can't have people owning the means by which we live. Well, okay, that raises an immediate question. In a workplace, if you don't have an owner, who's deciding things? So the answer for us, in thinking it through, was, we don't want there to be a strata of people who are deciding everything above everybody else. So the answer has to be the workforce. The answer has to be that the workforce is deciding, and the workforce needs an instrument by which to decide things, and that's typically called a workers' council. But now your question comes in. Okay, fine. So we say workers are going to make the decisions. Hello? In the world we understand, in the world we know now, workers are not inclined to even want to make decisions. They're not necessarily prepared They don't have the information. They don't have the confidence. They don't have. So why is that?
Hmm.
And therefore, what do we have to change for that not to be the case? And the answer that we felt strongly as we thought more and more about it, I mean, partly it has to do with things that go before the workplace, your upbringing and your schooling and so on. But set that aside for a minute. Inside the workplace, in capitalism, the economy we endure, and in what was called 20th century socialism,
Mm-hmm.
the Soviet economy,
Mm-hmm.
the division of labor looks almost identical. You have about 20% of the workforce doing jobs that are empowering, jobs which, at least to a considerable degree, give the person doing it information, confidence, connections to others, access to daily decision making, and so on. And 80% of the jobs are the opposite. They're disempowering. They literally reduce workers' skill, reduce workers' knowledge of the overall situation, reduce connections to others, eliminate access to daily decision making. And so
Mm-hmm.
what you have is that the phenomenon that we see, that workers don't seem disposed to participate in decisions, or prepared to, is not intrinsic. It's not innate. It's not something biological. It's a result of a particular division of labor.
Hmm.
So, if we want a new economy and we want workers to be running the show in their workplaces, we have to get rid of the old division of labor, not just private ownership. And that means that we have to combine tasks into jobs in a new way such that all jobs are comparably empowering of the people who are doing them. And then people are prepared.
Is this sort of another approach to nationalizing the well, at least major industries, that we say Facebook or Amazon or something, with these big bad guy bosses that have taken over the world and really shifted the way that we function. Is this sort of an alternative to nationalizing it?
Yes, it's an alternative to getting beyond capital, getting
Hmm.
beyond private ownership, but retaining a new boss in place of the old boss, where the
Hmm.
new boss, instead of being a relatively, a small number of big rich owners, is about 20% of the population.
Hmm.
And that's what we had in the old Soviet Union and in
Hmm.
various other countries. We got rid of owners, but we still had a very alienated, undignified, um, uh, top down, bossed around workforce and a group on top of that. So this
Hmm.
is a way to try and change from uh, the current situation to a new non-capitalist situation, which, however, avoids, it literally rules out the structures that caused old experiments of that sort to be highly compromised. Can I
Hmm.
tell you one story?
Of course,
That
yeah. Please
Okay.
do.
So years back in Argentina, there was an economic crisis, and it was so bad that a lot of capitalists decided to just leave their workplaces.
Hmm.
Um, they became dysfunctional, they became not profitable, and the capitalists decided to move on and just threw in the towel.
Hmm.
Not because of political pressure, not because of movements, but because the thing was failing. And a lot of managers and engineers and financial officers and so on looked at the situation and said, yikes, without the owner, we're doomed. So we're going to move on too.
Hmm.
So the workforces were left with the building, with the equipment,
Wow.
and without the owners, and without almost all of what I call the coordinator class, the manager. So the workers took over because they didn't have any place to go.
Hmm.
And so I was in Argentina and I was supposed to give a talk to a set of representatives from factories that had been occupied in that way. There
Hmm.
were about 50 representatives there, roughly speaking. And at the beginning of the meeting, we go around the room and everybody's very animated and excited. These people have taken over their workplaces, they've taken over their lives, and they're meeting people from distant parts of the country who have done similarly.
Hmm.
We go around the room with people introducing themselves. And after a very few minutes, the mood is changing. It's becoming quieter and then depressed. And by the time we get to the seventh person, and I remember because it made such an impression, by the time we get to the seventh person, the guy says, I never thought I would say anything like this. I can't imagine that I would have ever said anything like this. But maybe Margaret Thatcher was right.
Oh my
Maybe
gosh.
there is no alternative, right?
Huh.
And so what he was saying, and what the people before had been saying, was we took over, we instituted a workers' council, we instituted democracy. To an extent, we even instituted self-management, meaning people having a say in decisions in proportion to the degree that they're affected. We pretty much equalized wages, made some exceptions for good reasons, and now all the old crap's coming. Sorry. Now all the old. All right. Now all the
You're
old
fine.
crap's coming back.
Crap is okay.
Okay. Now all the old crap is coming back. It's getting alienated again. Incomes are are moving apart, etc. And I said, and you feel like that's just human nature at work.
Hmm.
And they said yes. And I said, well, let's just explore for a minute one other possibility. When you took over the workplace and you made it democratic and you fixed the wages and you did all these things, what did you do about the job structure? What did you do about the old jobs? And they said, well, we had to fill them. We learned how to. And I said, so you didn't change them at all? No.
Interesting.
And they sort of didn't understand the question at first because they thought, that's like saying, did you change the air? It's the way it is, right? And so it didn't occur to them to change it. And then I made a case that was the root of the problem, not human nature. That what was happening is they kept an old institution,
Right.
and that old institution has certain implications, and those implications were swamping all the good things that they had done. And I think you can see that in many co-ops and in many other circumstances, and you can also see it in whole countries like the Soviet Union.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting as you're describing that. I'm thinking about organizations, progressive organizations who fall
Sure.
into the same habits that other organizations, more establishment organizations fell into, because the actual like the way that the organization operates was not shifted.
Yeah.
And simultaneously we see it, in many other spaces as well. It's like, even the media space,
Yeah.
uh,
And it's
we
not a matter of bad faith. In other
right,
words, none of
exactly,
those workers in the Argentine factories wanted the outcome they got,
right,
but they effectively made a mistake. They
right,
didn't know to change that one circumstance, and they paid a price for it.
right.
Yeah, and it's sort of analogous to if you keep the owner. If you say you want freedom and you want justice and you want equity but you keep the owner, well, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Same idea, right?
There was
It's
this I'm going to I hate to bring him up and I might get in trouble for it, but there was this joke that Dave Chappelle made in his last very famous comedy special. But he
right.
talked about how the first man, and there's a movie now being done on this, the first man to be liberated when when slavery was announced. He didn't even know he was liberated, but then he found out. And then what does he do as a black man who is a former slave? He becomes a slave owner. He goes out
Yeah.
there and he brings in slaves, and it's because no one, that was all that was known. And so, whether it's gender equity space or any other liberation, you have to change the conditions. You have to change the
Yeah.
way way the conditions operate, I guess,
Yeah.
to be able to be truly liberated. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're falling into the same habits.
There used to be an old joke in the United States that the worst boss to have was an old IWW member. And the reason was because the IWW member, of course, understood everything about, about the class struggle, about people interacting, about striking, and so on and so forth. And as boss, he now had to operate in a new fashion, and he was very good at it. So that was, but I mean, it's not that we're ciphers and that we automatically become, that we have no will of our own. It's not that. But it is that if you're in a situation over and over for a long period of time, it does affect you and it does constrain your choices.
It's
So
conditioning.
that's what, and pressure, right?
Right.
Actual pressure. And that's what that part of participatory economics is about. So, I mean, covering ground quickly, get rid of the owners, treat productive assets, treat workplaces, resources, even skills and knowledge as a commons, not privately owned. Have workers' councils and also consumers' councils, because some consumption is private, but some is collective. So have that also. And then you have to have this new division of labor. And we call it balanced jobs or balanced job complexes. And that one becomes controversial among a lot of people because it does mean, in other words, what we're saying is consider a hospital. If surgery is an empowering job, which I think it is, so if it's an empowering job in a new situation with a different division of labor, somebody doesn't do only surgery. They do a mix of things, which is comparably empowering to the mix of things other people do. So somebody also doesn't only clean bedpans. Of course, there's learning involved, there's time involved, and the criticism that some will make is to say, I like what you're saying ethically. You know, I like it, but let's get real. Most people can't do these kinds of activities. That's what people will say. And so they'll say, in pursuit of classlessness, you are sacrificing productivity so much that it outweighs the benefits. In that same Argentine situation, I'm sitting in a workplace that had been taken over, talking to a woman who had previously worked at an open furnace. It was a glass factory. And so she spent all day doing essentially the same motions over and over in front of this furnace. And I did go and see it, and I would have lasted maybe 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was her life,
It's
right?
her life, yeah.
So they took over the workplace, and they're sitting around. And remember, the coordinator class left. So they got to do something about somebody keeping track of things, being the financial officer, so to speak. And she volunteered. So she became it. And notice they kept the old job. So she volunteered, she became it. And I'm talking to her, and I said, what was the hardest thing to learn? You know, what was the most difficult thing for you to become good at in order to be able to do this job? And meanwhile, now the factory is succeeding, where before, with the experts and the owners, it was failing. And she doesn't want to answer. She's a little, I guess embarrassed. So I said, well, was it learning to use a spreadsheet? She said, no. I said, was it learning accounting concepts? No. Was it learning how to, and I came up with 2 or 3 more things. And then I sort of just threw up my hands and said, what was it? And she said to me, first I had to learn to read.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And so the myth that the reason why working class people don't do work, don't do activity in the workplace that is empowering, that involves skills, that involves conception, and so on. The myth that that's genetic is no more intelligent than the myth that women didn't do it or blacks didn't do it because of genetic reasons. Right. It's a function of the structure of society and the way people are treated and denied and relegated and so on. And so that criticism, I think, bites the dust. And then we have those features. There's 1 or 2 more features, but we're sort of making quick progress.
So in the last couple of minutes here, can you help us understand? Is it all at once? Is it workplace by workplace? Like where's the path? What's the pathway to new economy for a better world?
That's called transition. There's still things like remuneration, how do people get income and how much, and allocation. But I guess running out of time, so that's a perfectly reasonable question. There's no single answer to that, right? That's called strategy and transition. And there really is no single answer to that. So, for instance, right now, somebody could start a firm or could transform an existing firm by introducing balanced jobs, by introducing self-managed decision making, and you'd have something that's sort of planting the seeds of the future in the present. It would be in the midst of markets and in the midst of profit seeking. It's not a whole new economy, but you could be doing that. Likewise, you can be fighting for a much higher minimum wage, or fighting for transparency, or fighting for, and so on. So as these movements proceed, you get to a point where it's possible for more and more workplaces, and even more important, more and more of the population, to share a vision and to share a commitment to it and to fight for it. And, it would be a lie to say that we can know in advance exactly what that will look like. But I think we can know a few things. So one thing, for example, is people get all up in arms on the left about reform and being reformist. All right.
Right. Oh, I know.
Okay. So
Been there, done that.
it doesn't make any sense for the following reason. First of all, fighting for things now is fighting for reforms, unless you're fighting for the whole damn thing overnight. And nobody is. So when you fight for higher wages, or for better conditions, or for constraints on the market to try and save the planet, you're fighting for reforms. Fighting for reforms is where lots and lots and lots of people learn not only what's wrong with society, but what would be better.
And the skills, too. So
yeah,
that when the revolution comes, you're ready.
Absolutely. But reformism is something that has a problem to it, and that's fighting for a change and seeing the change as the end, as the goal, and you fight for it, you win it if you do, and you go home. Okay, so that's reformism. But you don't have to fight for reforms that way. You can fight for reforms. You can fight for a $15 minimum wage, trying to organize in such a way as to arouse desires for $25 minimum wage. Or for, instead of a minimum wage, remuneration for duration, intensity, and onerousness of socially valuable labor, which is what participatory economics is. But the point is, you can constantly be fighting in a way to create the conditions to continue.
Right.
And that's not reformism. So I think we can say confidently that'll be part of the process, that kind of approach to winning change. I also think we can say confidently that if we're going to win something like participatory economics, our movements are going to reflect those values, and our movements are going to operate in accord with that kind of conception. Otherwise, it's hypocrisy. Otherwise, it is, instead of planting the seeds of the future, you're planting the seeds of the past, or you're planting the seeds of a different future that you don't want. So we can say things like that and more. But I do feel, and it's why I did the book No Bosses and have done other stuff like that, that it's powerfully important to have a vision, to have the inspiration that comes from it, the orientation that comes from it, the hope that comes from it. Those things matter to being active in a sustained way.
Michael, this is fascinating. Would love to have you back on. I would love to
anytime
dive in a little bit more about like solidarity and how to make sure that there's no infighting along the way, because that's a common thing.
Indeed.
That is, we are humans, and I feel like that's a little human nature in a sense.
Well, yeah, but I'd be happy to come back and talk about that. It's on my mind also.
Thank you, Michael Alpert. Check out the book No Bosses, Zero Books. Check it out right now. And I'm gonna follow up with a lot of questions. So the next time we have you on, I'm sure we'll have more from our audience as well. Michael, thank you so much, and happy holidays.
I'd be happy to relate to both.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Take care.